Welcome back to War Weekly News. This week the 1.97 dev server was opened twice. So hit that subscribe button because I'm going to make a video that covers everything that's coming in 1.97. I'm going to start out with Swedish tanks and work back to the US, but if you don't care about Swedish tanks or any other nation, there should be timestamps below to jump to which nation you wish. And for the Swedish tanks, I'm going to start with what I dub the light tank / tank destroyer line, because that's what it's made of, starting with the STRV M31, which is a reserve level tank armed with the M38 cannon, which is quite unimpressive, having only around 55mm of penetration at a decent velocity. It's nothing special speed-wise, only having 42 kilometers an hour and a 200 horsepower engine, and its armor is quite lackluster, although visually it looks like a pretty neat vehicle. And it does have some good angles, but it's still going to be 50 cal bait in the end. As a reserve tier tank, it's not going to stand out too much, but it'll be better than some of the worst. It's no France. Right after that, at 1.7 is the IKV-72, which is a lightly armored open-top tank destroyer armed with a 75mm M41 cannon. The main round does not have that much penetration, but 1.7 actually could do pretty well. However, the armor will definitely hold it back. But on the bright side is it has 20 degrees of depression, allowing you to use hills and other obstacles as armor. Other than that, the speed's actually pretty alright for 1.7 at 57 kilometers an hour with a 128 horsepower engine. Right after that is the STRV M41S2, which is a locally upgraded version of the Panzer 38T, armed with a 37mm M38 cannon. Its armor and speed are actually kind of the same to the regular 38T, but it happens to have a ace up its sleeve. At 2.3, this tank is armed with an APDS shell that gets 100mm of penetration. Now, straight on, most people find that part to be very chilling. A 2.3 tank with APDS that has 100mm of penetration, that seems like power creep. Well, that part isn't power creep because it's not the first shell at 2.3 to be able to pen over 100mm. There's plenty of German 50mm cannons that have APCR that can penetrate up to 150 or so. The real power creep part comes in at the angled penetration, as APDS is quite good at that stuff. Having at 30 degrees angle, 96mm of penetration, and at 60 degree angle, 40mm of penetration. Now, this still isn't a laser beam that cuts through everything at its battle rating. A well-angled T-34 will be able to deflect shells, but if you shoot it straight on, you're going to get through. Right after that, at 3.3 is the PKVK2. The Swedish 38T turned into a tank destroyer armed with a 75mm cannon and a fully rotatable turret attached to the top. While the whole armor is the same, the turret is only 15mm. However, the cannon makes up for this lack of armor with nearly the same amount of penetration as the Tiger. This tank will definitely be a nuisance to the enemies of Sweden on the battlefield. I'd also heard that this thing is power creep because it has the same amount of penetration as the Tiger, but only at 3.3. Although, perhaps people have forgotten, but the Chi Nu 2 used to have around the same amount much as penetration at 3.7. So this isn't anything new. In fact, it's a return to how things used to be. Speaking of which, at 3.7, the Chi Nu 2 was, and still is, pretty OP. Right after that, though, is another tank that people have been worrying about. The IKV-103 at 5.7 is a very poorly armored tank destroyer, armed with a 105mm cannon that shoots a regular 240mm penetrating heat shell, but can also shoot a 400mm penetrating heat FS shell that can indeed one-shot an IS-4M. The only downside to these high penetrating heat shells is they have horrible velocity. Besides that, it's a pretty speedy tank, going around at 53 kilometers an hour, and has a 145 horsepower engine. It's quite small, so you'll be able to cover it with bushes and other things and hide in places. The downsides of the tank, however, are the long reload, the low velocity, and the no armor. I one time was driving by and someone had dropped bombs a good while away and they somehow had killed me, yet not killing other tanks that were closer to the bombs. But this thing will be great for the memes. It's gonna destroy 5.7 for a little while. Don't bother taking a heavy tank anymore. After that, I'm gonna start calling this the meme line because the next tank at 6.3 is another meme. It's the USSR. This thing is, looks like one of the Italian mouse droids, but is armed with two 81mm Oerlikon Type 3Z8 Della launchers, which are rocket launchers that shoot heat rockets that penetrate 330mm of penetration at quite a high velocity, but also at a very rapid pace. And this little bug zips around at 37 kilometers an hour with a 90 horsepower engine. Although, as you probably assume, the armor is a bit worthless, having 10mm at the thickest, although the angles are good. The tank after that is less memey and more practical, the IKV-91. Told you it was coming. Coming to you at 7.7, this thing has a 90mm cannon that shoots 400mm penetrating heat FS. Very poor hull armor, of only having a max of 35mm, kilometers, though at some really nice angles. However, I feel that those aren't going to save you. It can get around the battlefield quite quickly at 70 kilometers an hour max speed with a 550 horsepower engine. The biggest disadvantage of this tank is that the cannon is unstabilized. However, I was still able to pull off some pretty quick shots despite this, as it didn't seem to bounce around all that much. If I were to be playing this thing, I'd probably play it like I do a Hellcat, going around the battlefield quickly and sniping enemies from a distance, which you should be able to do as your Heat FS has 820 meters per second velocity. Right after that is the SCRF-90C, a 9.3 IFV with no ATGMs, only a 40mm autocannon that can shoot 140mm penetrating APFSDS, but with an upgraded option of 170mm penetrating APFSDS, both going at pretty good velocities. Also has the option of proximity fused HE rounds if you need to shoot down any helicopters or planes in the vicinity, but also, like everything else at the high tiers for speeds, no good armor but good angles. And perhaps it's supposed to have some composite armor, but it seemed none was modeled. This thing is supposed to have some other tricks up his sleeve like thermal cloaking, although I was unable to test any of them. The biggest concern about this tank is that it doesn't have any ATGMs and only an autocannon, yet it's at 9.3. And while the APFSDS does have a nice penetration, it lacks the ability to deal with enemy targets up front, or at least the heavily armored ones like T-72s. You might be able to get some trap shots in thanks to your fire rate into like an Abrams or something, but we're going to have to wait for the live server to see if this thing really works out. The last in this line is the CV90-120. At 9.7, this is a very poorly armored tank with a 120mm L50 cannon that produces some very high velocity rounds. Like, the armor is actually so bad that in a custom battle I had a Sherman kill me from the front. But this thing will be a nemesis on the battlefield, being able to snipe from a very great distance. It also gets thermal sights to help out with that sniping, and I'm pretty sure it's supposed to have an active protection system, but it doesn't look like it's modeled. At the very least, not yet. Other than that, it has an 800 horsepower engine and its max speed is 70 kilometers an hour. The next line over is the medium tank line, starting with the STRV M38, which is once again a pretty stock standard rank 1 tank. However, this one's armor is better than the M31, but the gun is the same. The next tank down, the M40L at 2.0, is the same tank but slightly modified, having improved armor, although just about everything else is the same. Right after that at 2.7 is the Lago 1, which, while having a different armor layout, is unfortunately still in the same ballpark of poorly armored. However, this tank's 37mm gun can also fire the APDS that pens 100 at 10 meters. And after that is the M42EH, which is a similar armor layout and similar armor values as the prior tank, but this one's at 3.0 and has a 75mm cannon that can pen about 85mm of armor. Personally, I feel that this tank is going to be awful. There is a very large gun mantlet that has less armor than the areas around it. Not that the 34mm of armor is going to stop anything at 3.0 anyways. The next one down, Dalat Torn, is kind of like a small Swedish Chiri 2. Has a big bulky turret that houses a 75mm cannon with an autoloader, the first 4 shells of which have a 3.4 second reload. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be the first 5 shells, but Gaijin seems to never count the shell that's in your cannon. The shells themselves have the same amount of penetration as the PKVK2. However, I still think that the Chiri 2 is a better tank, as the main bonus of the Chiri 2 is it has lots of crew members. It's one of the same amount, but it's also big and open, so you can take a small amount of ammunition, about 20 rounds, and the bottom of your tank is completely empty, having lots of shells just pass right through, while this one is quite cramped and has a lot of things that could produce shrapnel. And on top of that, the armor is also awful, only being 34mm. Like, really, it seems the Swedish don't have any tanks with strong armor, and perhaps that's the gimmick of this tree: fast tanks with no armor and powerful guns. The next tank fits that category just as well. The STRV-74 is a very narrow but yet very tall tank, and the turret is a bizarre pointy shape, but being 6.3, the armor does not hold up, being about 34 on the turret, and the added angles do not assist much at all, allowing even short 88 cannon rounds to go through. But really, the only reason why this tank is such high in the tech tree is the APDS shell it has that can penetrate about 250mm. Despite that great penetration, I don't think it overcomes all the detriments that this tank has. Next in line, there's a bit of a jump to 6.7 with the STRV-81, what is more commonly known as the Centurion Mark III. It's a copy-paste tank. After that is the STRV-101, which is a Centurion Mark X, which is also a copy-paste tank. I was really hoping for some of the more unique modifications of the Centurion that the Swedish had, like the 102, which was a Mark III Centurion with a 105mm cannon put into it, or the 101R and 101-2, which was the respective tanks but upgraded with more modern equipment like laser rangefinders and whatnot, or some of the later variants that they had, like the 104 or 105, which was essentially covering the tank thinking explosive reactive armor. But I guess we're going to have to wait for another patch for those things to come. After those comes the STRV-103A, which at first is very exciting. However, there is possibly a major flaw in its design in War Thunder. As you can see, there are some little bumps on the top of the tank, which were placed there to help give it some extra protection. And I assume it functions as intended in real life. However, in War Thunder, those little bumps give heat shells something to grab onto and penetrate the tank. I had predicted this to be the case many months ago, and hopefully they fix it if it is an issue by the time the patch is live. At the very least though, it should give you more defense against APF-SDS, as that stuff does not seem to bounce off you. Other than that though, the tank is basically the same. And the following tank, the STRV-103C at 8.7, is just like it, although the bumps are only 20 millimeters now, but also can fire APF-SDS itself. It also has a fence on front of it to stop heat shells, but at 8.7 you're not going to run into too many heat shells. And unfortunately we did not get the D model of the 103. Overall though, these tanks are alright I guess, a bit gimmicky and kind of cool, but their gimmicks don't seem to really hold together too much, especially with the poor controls. It's still rather chunky. Hopefully once again that gets fixed by the time the patch is live, but I don't have high expectations. And ending line is the STRV-121, which to my knowledge is just a Leo 2A4. This variant, I don't think the Swedes changed anything at all from what is currently in the German tree. The actual last tank is the STRV-122, which is a Swedish Leo 2A5, though it's not a copy-paste. It does have some different stuff. Most notably would actually be the top of the turret. It's some bizarre weird angles. It's only 20 millers, and you can actually penetrate it with HE and HESH. However, most people don't have those loaded at top tiers. The rest of the turret is the same as the Leo 2A5, armor values and all. The real big difference, and what's got everybody freaking out about this tank, is that on the dev server, it was quite thick. Thicker than the 2A5. So thick, in fact, that it seemed only the Italians would be able to penetrate it with their super spaghetti round. Besides that, though, it's just a Leo 2A5. And it's possible these values could be reduced by the time it's on the live server, though it's not likely. And in my personal estimation, I think the helicopters that shoot from 10 kilometers away are going to do more damage to top tier than this tank, as you can still shoot this thing in the side, but I don't know, top tier is going to be a bit of a mess after this patch. So on to the SPAG line, starting with the PVLVV FM42, which I questioned was supposed to be a SPAG or not because it actually has some pretty poor elevation. But with a 20mm autocannon that penetrates 42 millimeters, I think this wing will actually be pretty great. The next bag coming to you at 3.0 is the LVT DGB M40, and it's a truck with a Bofors on the back. It also has some armor plates attached to it. Not a whole lot to this. It looks very cool though. Cover it in red so it goes faster, and hope the planes don't strafe you. The next one down the line is the L62 Anti-2 at 4.0, which, while looking neat, doesn't do much more than the prior one, except for it's not as big target. The armor isn't really going to protect you against many planes, guns, and you still have a big open top. Following that is the LVKV42 at 4.7. This thing is going to be a monster, like the French one is. It has a single 40mm cannon with 240 shots per minute fire rate and 95mm of armor penetration. The one difference though that it has with the French one is this one does not have nearly as much ammunition, having only 96 rounds, but is good at killing planes and it's good at killing tanks. After that is a jump to 8.0 with the VEAK-40, a big boxy tank that has two radar guided 40mm cannons with the same high penetration and fire rate. Best of all, you actually have some ammunition, 240 rounds. Besides that, it's a big target and has no armor. Right after that is a 9.0 SPAG, very uncommon, the LVKV-90C. And hold on a second, I recognize that thing. Well, yeah, it's just the STRF-90C, but in SPAG configuration. There's a big R2-D2 on the back of the turret that I believe is a radar system, and it doesn't have access to the 170mm penetrating APF-SDS, but besides that, it's the same thing. You get 40mm proximity fuse HE, you get APF-SDS if you want to shoot down tanks. There's a strong likelihood that this thing will follow in the footsteps of the AT-ATs and the ZSU-57 and have a higher spawn cost than other SPAGs. However, this is not the last SPAG in the lineup, as there is the LVRBV-701, a mobile box with a missile launcher on top. The missile launcher can either shoot anti-air missiles or anti-tank missiles, and it also has radar. The main issue I find with this thing, however, is that it does not have a lot of turret traverse, so you end up finding to have to turn the tank a whole lot to keep track of the aircraft. Now, stationary helicopters and maybe things far off, this won't be as much of an issue, but anything close by, it could be quite a nuisance. Also, Also, it requires a brain to function correctly, and I seem to be lacking that whenever I take it out. Biggest disappointment about this tank is you can't change what type of missile you want to shoot mid-match. You have to do it in the modification menu. And on the dev server, it wasn't functioning correctly. The ATGMs were seemingly to also be the anti-air missiles and not penetrating things that they should have. The final line for Swedish tanks is the tank destroyer line, starting off with the FM4344, which is a 1.7 150mm yeet cannon with the slowest velocity of them all. I don't think it's the slowest in game though, but slowest for 150mm. The vehicle itself had some silly glitches to it, but that's the dev server. It's very nice to see another one of these silly tanks in game, even though this one does not have as much penetration as the Japanese one. Although over the others, this one is recoilless, which benefits you 0 in game, but it's neat. The next tick down the line was the SAV M43 1944, a 2.0 tank destroyer with a 75mm cannon and around 50mm of armor. The cannon will get you a max of 69mm of penetration, and the vehicle has a max speed of 43 kilometers an hour. Overall, this isn't going to be the star of the show, but at 2.0, I think it'll be able to pull through. And it's better than that silly bread loaf tank the French have. One battle rating up at 3.0 is the SAV M43 1946 with a 105mm cannon and the same armor stats. What's different about this one is the ammunition. Not only is it 105mm, but you start out with a shell that only pens 67mm of armor, but you can get a heat shell that pens 240mm of armor. To put things into perspective a bit, the closest similarity I could find currently in game would be of the Su-122, which only has 160mm of penetration, and it's also 3.0. The next tank to get anywhere near 240mm of penetration with any shell that I could find would be the Stura Emil with 248mm of penetration with this upgraded round. I'm not so sure this thing should be 3.0. Maybe it's gonna be higher in the live server. Maybe the Swedes are just gonna be OP. Their premiums are, so. The next tank down, the PKVK M43 1946, is a open top tank destroyer at 5.0 with a 75mm cannon and 70mm of frontal armor. Looks like a stock standard tank destroyer. It has the same gun as other long 75s, having the same amount of penetration as the Tiger. The next one down the line is an upgrade of it. At 6.3, you get the PKVK M43 1963. This one has the same amount of armor, also a 75mm gun, is no longer an open top, but most impressively has an APDS shell that can pen 243mm of armor. However, because of the other stats are kind of lackluster, especially its speed of only 47 kilometers an hour and being a casemate, I think this thing isn't gonna break any new boundaries like some other tanks we had. Next down the line is the UDES-33. At only 7.7 is a mouse-guided ATGM tank. I think it's the lowest one with mouse-guided ATGMs. It's a silly beetle-looking tank with a ATGM that can pen 430mm of armor. And the last tank in this line is the PVRBV551 9.0 is another ATGM tank. Only thing really special about it is it can get the ATGM upgrade from the RB55Bs to the RB55Cs. The difference being that the Cs fly faster but have a bit less penetration. Besides that, it's an ATGM tank. Not much to write home about. The last two tanks on the dev server are the STRV M39, which I am told is different than the M38, but in game they seem to be the exact same tank, and the CV90-105 TML, which is like the CV90-120 but with a 105mm cannon. It has the same lack of armor, though the turret looks like it's off the AMX-10 RC, and it can fire either M735 or DM23 of all shells. But besides that, it's the same as the 120 version. It's most likely going to be a pack vehicle, though I have no idea on what the price would be. Now, if you thought that was all the vehicles, because that's all the vehicles in the tree, well, you're wrong there. There's a few more that happen to be found in the files. There's only two, and apparently they're going to be GE premiums, although every premium vehicle, whether it be a pack or a event vehicle, have a GE value attached to them. There was the STRV M41S1, which I believe is just a copy-paste of the Panzer 38T. The model actually I think is different, but stats and all that are the same. But that's no reason not to have it. The other one is the STRV 74 RB52, which, as you could assume, is a STRV 74 with SS11s on it. We already know what the STRV 74 is like, so just think that with some ATGMs on it. I wonder if they would up the battle rating at all, but this thing's already going to struggle at 6.3. I don't think the ATGMs are going to help it much. As for aircraft, Sweden received two vehicles. One of them you probably know about, but the other one is the Mirko Moraine, which was a French SM406 the Finnish had souped up, giving it MG151s and the engine of a Yak-1. However, unfortunately, in the dev server it only had the standard French armament, so hopefully they can fix that up before the patch is live. The final new vehicle would be the J-35D, a Mach 2 Delta Wing jet fighter that could take out 4 air-to-air missiles, missiles, so rockets, or a mix of the two. The vehicle seemed to be up to snuff to all the other top tier jets out there, however it had nothing special about it, besides being a delta wing, which doesn't give it any magical advantage over others. Its air-to-air missiles were kind of standard, nothing too amazing, but not terrible. The main guns had a lack of ammo, but that's common among these top tier jets, so in no way did they seem to be lacking compared to others. Perhaps there's something I'm missing. I don't play top tier a lot, so it's likely I'm overlooking some details, but I think I know how to at least spot a good plane or a bad plane, and this one doesn't strike any of those boxes as to be extreme in either direction. I guess the one advantage it has is it can pull off the Cobra maneuver, but I don't know if that's going to be useful outside of sim. The next nation on the list is France, who got no planes or boats or helicopters, but they did get quite a few tanks. Well, they got one new tank, the AMX-32, which is kind of just like an AMX-30 but with the AMX-40's cannon. It comes at 9.3 right before the AMX-40, armed with, as I said, the same gun and a 20mm coaxial machine gun, or I guess coaxial cannon in this case. Did not seem to have any autoloader, and all the composite armor seemed to only be space armor, although perhaps this is dev server not having it modeled correctly yet. Very similar to the J-35D in the case that it doesn't really bring anything new to the battlefield, but it's definitely not going to be a terrible vehicle. Positive side is that it does give French players another tank to take out in their lineup. On the downside though, it does come right before the AMX-40, so if you are researching that, you better hurry up. The other vehicles that France get aren't exactly new vehicles, but they're new to the French tree, is a M4A3-105, same as the one in the US tree, and if you're unaware, is currently a Seal Clubber. They're also receiving a M3A3 Stuart and a Crusader Mark III. However, unlike the British Crusader, this one is at rank 2, so it's likely it could receive scouting mechanics. With all these together, it really strengthens France's ability to Seal Club entirely at 2.3, having the B1 Terra, a Crusader, M3A3, and if you want to bring it up a little bit in battle rating, a M4A3-105. Italy at first seemingly had received nothing this patch, which was unfortunate, but on the second dev server they did finally receive a Centauro with 120mm cannon, which was indeed a Centauro with a 120mm cannon. It had the same ammunition as the regular L-44. It had thermals in both the gun sight and the commander binoculars, and every time I took it on the battlefield, I seemed to one-shot most, if not all, of the vehicles that you could shoot at. China received two things, a new tank, the ZTZ-96A, which is better than the prior one, but still had some issues with armor layouts. Perhaps it's dev server issues, but even where the armor was, it was still kind of weak. But that didn't stop it from looking cool. They also received a F-100A. This one was different from the French and US one, as it had an A at the end of the name instead of a D. I was unable to spot any actual differences. Perhaps the performance is less, but it also did not have as much loadouts as the US one did, like the French one. Japan received three new vehicles. The boring ones were two boats, a copy-paste premium Suzuya, the IJN Mikuya, which I'm assuming is going to go for Golden Eagles. I have no idea how much because Gaijin kind of just gave it to me. But of the Mugamis, it is one of the ones with only 15cm cannons. They also received the Ikazuchi post-war destroyer escort with two 76mm cannons that had your basic rounds, but also proximity fused shells. Neat and everything, and the premium cruiser I'm looking forward to, but let's get to what people really want to hear about. The F4EJ, which is a Japanese variant of the F4E that America got. The only difference I could spot between these two planes is the US one had more loadouts. Performance and everything else seemed the same. But about these planes, there's a lot to talk about, probably enough to make their own video about, so I'm going to talk as much as I can about them without making it too long. Put it simple, these are probably going to be some of the top planes of top tier. Not only having amazing speed and acceleration and all that, but great loadouts, including a new missile, the AIM-9Js, which could pull 20 Gs before breaking lock, and also lock on from quite a great distance. But new missiles aren't the only trick up their sleeve, as they also are equipped with flares, which you have to spam out quite a few that actually get the missile to stop tracking you, but are quite fun to do, and don't worry, you have a good amount of them. But that's not the only new feature they got. They also have a bomb targeting computer, which in the dev server made it so when you point your nose down, had bombs equipped, you get an arcade bomb targeting reticle, which may sound underwhelming, but with the amount of bombs these things can hold, you could definitely do a lot of damage to an enemy team. Even more so as you're not required to have a gun pod on the bottom of it, as these planes also have a gun in the nose finally. The UK got quite a few things. First off with the Roycott 105, which is, that's a Roycott with a bigger gun at 8.7. Not a whole lot to write home about this thing. It's fast, it's neat, it's going to be premium. Let's get on to the next thing with the Lightning F6, which is a very cool top tier jet. A lot of talk on whether this thing is better or worse than the British Phantom. I'm sure I made it clear earlier in this video that top tier jet comparison isn't my area of expertise. So I'll stick with what I know. It looks very cool, and the red top missiles that it can get are very awesome with extremely long range of lock-on. Could easily snipe an unaware player with one of these from quite the distance away. Besides that, the jet looks very cool, and I personally would be kind of interested in getting it. However, I'm terrible at jets, so I'm probably never going to. The British got two new ships, the HMS Kent and the HMS London. I believe they have the same class of vessel, having the same type of guns and number of turrets, and thus the London is the better of the two vessels. It's armed with 8 203mm cannons and a good number of anti-air, and those interested in the British Navy, I'm sure, are looking forward to this, though I'm still waiting for the hood. Where the hood at? USSR got one new tank, the T-72B, which was covered in explosive reactive armor, and when I say covered, I mean covered, which gave quite a good amount of protection all over the vehicle. Everything else about the tank, though, seemed to be the same with the regular T-72A. Well, it's a T-72, and covered explosive reactive armor, so it's just better. In the terms of flying things, they received two new vehicles, and I'm sure you've heard of them about now, starting with the Ka-29, which is filler. I've talked about this thing when it got a dev blog, and everything there says it holds up here. This thing's definitely filler, because right after it on the line is the Ka-52, which is what everybody wants. And it is the proper sequel to the Ka-50, as it does everything that did, but better, and then has some new features. Like, seriously, when you're making a sequel to the game, you don't need to reinvent the whole wheel. Just have the things that people like, add a few new things, and maybe get rid of the things that people didn't like. Don't start taking away features because, oh, we don't want to have too many features. It's a sequel. People are expecting more. Like, they really could have done something with Fallout 4, but it's just, like, it's better, I guess, in some senses, but in a lot of other senses, it fails to live up. And don't even get me started on Fallout 76. Let's talk about this stupid helicopter. As I was saying, it's just a better Ka-50. It's in the tech tree now, and it's at 10.0. Well, this is the dev server battle rating. It could change in the future. You have the same ATGM as the other one, but now you can take them out with air-to-air missiles and still have the full load. But this time around, you also have thermals, and apparently they're adding some sort of targeting computer for rockets in helicopters, though I was unaware of this at the time the dev server was open and was unable to test it. It's times like this when I really wish I had one of those discount codes to give you guys, because I know some of you are going to golden eagle yourself up to the new helicopter, and I have no disrespect towards you people. Gaijin is giving you the option. In fact, they're incentivizing you to do it, so it's not your fault. It's Gaijin's fault for allowing this situation to be a thing. But I have an alternative to what you could do with your money besides buy overpowered vehicles in War Thunder. What if you bought an Attack the D-Point t-shirt on Teespring? I even adjusted the prices so that they're equal in the Europe and America, unlike Gaijin does, because I recognize that a euro is not equal to $1. They also received two ships, the Chipive and the Nistrasi. The Chipive is just an improvement of their last light cruiser and is at the end of the tech tree. Nothing really much to write home there, more anti-air and all that good stuff. The other one, the Project 14, is a post-war destroyer armed with 400mm cannons with a pretty good fire rate, and I was actually able to do a lot of damage with some of their shells. And it's a very modern looking boat, something I'd be looking forward to. I'm assuming it's going to be a Golden Eagle vehicle, as they said that there was going to be no naval packs. Germany got 4 new things, starting with the tanks, the Radkampfwagen 90, which is essentially just a German speedy boy, armed with a 105mm cannon, had 2 types of APFS-DS and Heat FS. None of the shells seem new to the game, but altogether this package is quite well. The armor, of course, is nothing, but the speed is good. In the terms of aircraft, they only got the Ju-188A2, which is like the Ju-288, but in the main tech tree and a slower battle rating of 5.3, though it has similar bomb loads. At least one of them you can take out both a 1800 kilogram bomb and a 1000 kilogram bomb. However, the aircraft does not seem to like carrying those bombs. It also has an assortment of many other bomb loads you can take. It will be great for bombing bases or SRB if you need to rush the enemy spawn, but can't afford the Ju-288. And in terms of boats, they got 2 new ones, the Leipzig, which is the sister ship of the Nuremberg, and seems to share just about the same loadouts with slightly less anti-air or something, and the Cologne F220, which isn't an upgrade of the light cruiser as I was thinking it was, is actually a post-war frigate armed with 2 100mm guns with a good fire rate, and had some rockets and plenty of anti-air. Overall, it looks like a nice boat, but America has more interesting things than a nice boat. First off, they had the F4E, which you probably already know about because I talked about it earlier in this video, but they also got the A4B, which you also probably know about. There was a dev log for it, but in game it performs very well in my opinion. Being at 8.7, being right before the FJ4B, this vehicle will satisfy all your ground attacking needs, or if you just want to spam bullets in the air thanks to its gun pods. But it gets rockets, air-to-air missiles, bullpups, everything. It was also quite capable against enemy aircraft, which is great because it comes stock with only its 2 main 20 20mm cannons. However, the best thing about this plane is that it has a very quick roll rate. For aircraft, the US also got 2 new Apaches, and the British also got an Apache, and I'm sure many of you are very psyched for it. However, in my personal feeling, it's not too much different than the existing helicopters. Perhaps there's some mechanics that this thing is supposed to have that aren't functioning in the dev server, but it felt like just any other helicopter with Hellfires. The first variant, actually had more possible loadouts, though the majority of these loadouts were less effective equipment opposed to what the D could carry. You had a choice between Hellfires, upgraded Hellfires, AIM-9Ls, and AIM-29 Stingers, though I don't know if any of those are actually new to the game. The D had the same options except for you couldn't take out the AIM-9Ls, and the cockpits were more well armed. Generally, they're kind of the same helicopter, however the D had more advantages over the other one. The other Apache to come would be the British version, which was like the D, however instead of Stingers it had Starstreaks, or whatever those British missiles are called, and they were kind of useless. Like the ones on the ground, they have to get a direct hit to do any damage to the aircraft, but unless you want to try to stick in the cockpit view and follow the jet, which doesn't work really well when the jet is going quite fast, the AI isn't that great at tracking the jets either. Now normally that's not much of an issue as the missiles have proximate fuses, but as I said, these ones you have to get a direct hit. The AI just can't do that. You'll get some if the jet's going in the right direction or whatever, but unlike the anti-air missiles, with these ones you can actually strike targets on the ground. Now they don't really do any damage at all, and they're still quite inaccurate. I don't know, because it's technically more ATGMs, but it doesn't get any brimstones, and the US ones don't get any more advanced Hellfire missiles, so I'd still say that the Russian ones have the more advantage with their proximate fused 10km range ATGMs. However, if Gaijin does more future creep, I think the Apaches will eventually be better off at the end. The one new vehicle that the US got that wasn't flying was the USS Portland, and I actually had some pretty low expectations because Portland is kind of a trash hole, but this ship was alright. It was armed with 9 20cm cannons. However, it didn't have the fire rate to keep up with some of the vessels that are currently ruining the seas, but thanks to its large caliber cannons, it can pack quite a punch. The other new things for this patch were the Swedish map of Sweden, and I was generally disappointed in this map. Now, for a city map, it's bigger than the most. It has an alright layout. Really, you'd have to see how well it does with combat when it's in the live server. Can't do much with custom battles and test servers. And aesthetically, it does look nice, but the major problem is that the airstrips are not highways. Completely ruins my immersion. And neither was there any dragons or Viking raiding parties. It's completely unhistorical. Some of the other new things are the explosions look better now. And it's very more Hollywoody, and I was asking for this, so it's nice to see, but it's nothing much to write home about. But also, there's new sound effects for cannons in third person. They didn't redo them for first person or when you're looking down the scope. But in third person, they sound much different. And normally, I'm very pro with the changes in the sound, but these ones I don't really like. Now, don't get me wrong, some of them sound really good, but some of them sound much weaker than you'd expecting. Like some of the 40mm cannons, they sound like a pistol. Like a real life pistol, not like a video game pistol, which sounds much different. But luckily, sound mods exist, so I think I'll be looking into what one to get. Any suggestions? Another neat feature they added, and I'm not sure why this one's optional, is that the speed of sound. Now, when you shoot something, like a bomb or explosive, far away, it takes time for that sound effect to get to you. It's optional for whatever reason, like you could just have it not be there, but I'm very much pro towards it, though it was kind of buggy at times. Like, instead of having a whoosh sound effect when you fire the rockets, there would just be no whoosh and just the explosion of the rockets. There was quite a few other changes that aren't new vehicles that I may or may not have mentioned. Like actually quite a few vehicles got bomb targeting computers, including the British F4, just about all the MiG-21s and the T2. And the British F4 also got flares, however the first American F4 did not get flares. And so far still none of the MiGs had gotten flares. A good number of vehicles got retagged, but also there's a new naval class called Frigate, which is for ships that aren't quite destroyers but are bigger than the gunboats, and so they don't spawn in the gunboat spawn and immediately murder everyone. You can no longer do that, K2 captains. A few positive changes to the game are that now the Swedish air tree is open to everybody. It now costs quite a bit more to spawn a helicopter with ATGMs, which should put a cap on the new helicopters completely destroying the game. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they reverse this in a few months though. And a ship can stay in the battle even though it's doomed to fail eventually anyways. And another neat feature that they added is the command menu, or whatever they're calling it. Essentially, you may have forgotten which key does what because there's so goddamn many keys to bind in this game. But now you have a menu, kind of like the T-chat menu, for commands of whatever vehicle, whether it be a plane, ship, or tank that you're driving. Now, the final bit of news is the presumed release date of this patch is to be Tuesday, or the 10th, as that was the date that was put on the Xbox website way back when we had those Apache leaks back in December. But also, it has been found in the files that is the supposed release date. And those typical release dates, they are not always 100%, but typically get around that date. So it could be the 9th, hey, it could be the 11th, but Gaijin likes to release things on Tuesday, so it's probably going to be the 10th. Now I could probably go quote mine all the forum stuff for even more information, but this video, well, the recording of it is about 30 minutes long, and I'm hoping that I can shave some of this off, but I think it's long enough. So first, I'd like to thank my YouTube members. John is having a divorce. Hopefully Kara lets him see the kids. Tex, One Max, Roger Rammer, Grimace, I like them thick, Mighty Peppers, Pointless Gunsinks, and Waffly Joker 6. A big thank you to all of you. If you want to join these YouTube members and make me say silly names, you have to hit the join button down below. It's $5 a month. YouTube members get videos uploaded a little bit early, unique Discord role, and emojis during streams. But if you want to support me and get something back, once again, there's that Teespring sale going on. There should be a link to that in the pinned comment. But if you have any comments, concerns, or questions, you can hit me up down below or on my Discord. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you didn't like the video, don't hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. I make War Thunder Weekly news videos every Sunday. I make random videos throughout the week, and I like to stream on Saturdays. So be sure to hit the bell icon to be notified anytime I upload anything. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. In the terms of bonus news, I could talk about the J-35D's ridiculously high repair cost, or how the Lynx helicopter can have a 102mm cannon upgrade. But something that's actually newsworthy, the Dataminer Mark 10D had found that it's very possible the April Fool's event will be for spider tanks, which gets me thinking of all kinds of anime stuff. But don't put your ghost in the shell quite yet, because apparently there's going to be some sort of crafting event attached to it. Oh, and this happened right when I was editing this video. Apache pack on the Xbox store. Yeah, the patch is coming tomorrow. Although it seems like there's two Apache packs, one for the prototype and one for the Israeli Apache. Maybe one is Xbox exclusive, which would be disappointing.